You mentioned car insurance. Where does health insurance fall in this? Because health insurance right now is making everyone completely insane. No matter what side you're on, everyone is crazy about this. So what is then the answer for health insurance in your view?
Right.
I guess that's probably the last question I'll ask you for the interview.
Health insurance. So I have the extreme view that there's no reason for government to be involved in this area at all. And what's very striking is that while most economists officially would disagree, but when I've actually gone and argued with them, usually when they argue for regulation, they're arguing for regulations to fix other regulations. And when I say, well, what if we just didn't have the first regulations you're trying to fix? Then the reaction is kind of like, well, I never really thought about it that much. So, just for example, the whole idea of Obamacare is that, all right, well, first we're going to have a regulation saying that you can't turn people down for insurance. And secondly, we're going to have a regulation saying that you can't charge them higher prices. And then people normally realize, well, wait a second, if you have a system like that, then a lot of people just wait around until they're sick. And so then we're going to require people to buy insurance to avoid the problems created by the first two regulations. And then then there's people too poor to afford it. So then we're going to subsidize those people to deal with the other three regulations. All right. So, my view is there's really no reason why you couldn't have scrapped all the regulations and just said, look, here's your incentive to buy insurance. If you wait until you're sick, you won't be able to afford it.
But then what do you do for those people? So I get that. But isn't then what happens as a result of that is that X amount of people, and it's going to be a lot of people, simply will not do it because they'd rather spend their money elsewhere and hope that they'll be healthy, or they'll just get a broken leg playing basketball or something else or whatever. And then we still end up paying for them, right? Don't the rest of us automatically end up paying for them?
Not automatically. Again, if you get rid of all those regulations, then what? It's fee for service, and then you have to rely on charity. Of course, charity includes family, includes everybody else that might want to help you, but. And you say, well, that's terrible. I wouldn't want to have to deal with that. Yes, that's why you buy insurance in advance, is because you don't want to be put in that position.
Right. So
of course, then you start thinking about the horrible cases, like what about a child born to irresponsible parents and the child has a lifelong congenital disease? I say that's the kind of thing that charities are going to be very well equipped to handle. They're probably not going to be so equipped to handle someone who's 25 and was earning a middle-class income but didn't feel like buying insurance, and then they come down with a horrible problem. Those are ones where I think you're likely to be very low in priority, and it's more like you're an adult and it was your responsibility to take care of yourself. But sort of in the background is the issue of how can you just be so callous as to say, if you went and did something really dumb, that it's just your own tough luck. And so I have this old blog post called Tough Luck, where I say, you know what? Every political philosophy ultimately says tough luck to people. It's just a question of where they draw the line. So, there's what if there's a conservative government in power and they conscript my son and he's sent to another country and he dies? What happens then? And of course, the conservative answer is ultimately, well, tough luck. That's the system. Like in my system, you can be conscripted to fight in a war you don't want to, and sometimes when that happens, you get put into a lethal area and you die. And well, my life has been ruined, and what are you going to do about it? Nothing. I'll give you a plaque. All right, even someone who is the firmest supporter in the world of socialized medicine. So what if a person goes and cuts off their own legs, and then whenever you go and send someone to help them, they throw things at them? What are you going to do then? Well, then I guess tough luck. All right, then that person is just going to be alone and be suffering because they wouldn't go along with the system. Yeah. All right. So given that every single philosophy ultimately says tough luck, I don't see why people who believe in the free market should feel especially embarrassed to say, well, yeah, my system, this is where we draw the line, and if you have failed to do all of these things, then it's your problem.
Because there is no perfect system, basically.
Yes, there's no perfect system, and again, would it be a perfect system if someone could be completely irresponsible 100 times in a row and would still get treated like everybody else?
Mm-hmm. Have they done any studies that you know of where they've shown where, in cases that the government pulls back, that charity does take care of this stuff, so that in the case, which I think is a legitimate, philosophically, I fully get what you're saying there, that if we just pulled back a little bit, that people would give more. Is there evidence of that? Because I suspect
so it's almost all the evidence is the other way around, where there used to be private charity, and then government started doing it, and then people measure what happened to the charity that was involved. So this is called crowding out. There's a whole field, economics of charity, where they study this, and this is a totally standard result that There are many areas that private charity used to take care of, like helping out the poor, and as government expanded its role, the role of private charity shrank down, and eventually private charity moved into other areas the government wasn't doing very much about.
Yeah.
So like in the 30s. So the 30s is sort of when there was a big transition, because there were many private organizations. There were things called fraternal clubs and organizations that were private clubs that did a lot of things that the modern welfare state does. So if you lost your job, they take care of you. If there was sickness, they go and take care of you. The 30s was such a protracted depression. It was a depression that partly started breaking down then. But again, a lot of it was government took over. And once government took over, there really wasn't much point to belong to the organizations anymore, except to go and put on funny hats and have a party once a month.
Yeah.
But like a lot of these like groups that like you remember your grandfather being part of, like the Elks or the Odd Fellows, these actually provided these welfare state functions privately in the past.
So do you think that something like government-funded Planned Parenthood, which I'm sure, regardless of your feelings on abortion, I'm sure you're not for the government funding that. I can accept that part. So for myself, I'm pro-choice, but when I see all these people talking about public funding of all these things, it does seem to me that if the government stopped funding these things, not made them illegal, not made abortion illegal, but stopped funding, that this seems like a case where so many people are so passionate about it. All these people in Hollywood who are constantly tweeting about this and screaming about it, that they would start funding these things. So is that a great example of this?
I think it is a great example. I mean, here's the main thing that is troubling about the economics of charity is there's a bunch of causes that people really care about, and those I'm not worried about. Those, there's going to be plenty of money for them. There's a bunch of other terrible things happening in the world that private charity manifestly hasn't solved. It hasn't gone and solved international refugee problems. It's doing something, but there's still terrible things going on. It hasn't solved hunger in other countries. And the thing is that these are problems that taxpayers don't care much about, and that charitable givers don't care very much about. So Bill Gates cares, and he's single-handedly making a noticeable dent in the problem. But again, sort of like the issues that people are really concerned about, the ones that have a lot of support for taxpayers to do something about them, are also very plausibly ones where private donors would care a lot as well.
Yeah. Is there any situation where you think regulation is necessary? Is there, I'm sure someone watching this is going to comment, well, what about the rivers? They're going to pollute all the rivers or anything. Is there any instance where you see it as necessary?
So, what I would say is, I don't know. I would say, so there's a lot of areas where, given the current setup, it's very hard to see how either a for-profit or even a charitable response to it. Again, the question in my mind is always, if we imagine going and privatizing things the government now does, then what's left? And then what's left the charity can't handle? So, and again, that's, to me, part of being an anarcho-capitalist is at least saying, well, let's privatize and see, before saying there's no way that private action is going to handle this problem. Let's go and take a look. And of course, private solutions may take a while to emerge, but then again, there are many problems the government has dealt with very poorly so far. So I don't think it's fair to say after a year, private sector hasn't solved this yet, so therefore clearly government's necessary. We'll maybe give it some more time. But again, the ones that I think are the clearest cases are air pollution. So that's one where it's very hard to exactly see how how for-profit sector would handle it. It's one where
because air pollution moves across state borders.
Air pollution moves. You're not walking around in a bubble. Again, it's one where, suppose that government didn't do anything about it, but there's private charity involved, right? Private charity to go and say subsidize lower polluting technologies or offer prizes for lower polluting technologies, and then give away the patent so that the new technologies are really cheap. Again, so as to how well that would work, I honestly would have to say it's so far from where we are. I don't know, but I think we should give it a try.
Yeah. So most people watching this know that I'm a limited government guy. I believe in states' rights. I would always rather be governed by my mayor and my local representative than federal.
Rather be governed by the mayor of Los Angeles. Wow. All right. So
he lives a little closer to me than the people in D.C. Yeah. Let's put it that way. Regardless of my feelings of the mayor of Los Angeles, but generally speaking, I believe in local control. So are there instances where local control has done this better? Is there a town you can point to, or is there a state maybe that's doing some of this a little bit better?
Let's see. So, given that there's so many states and so many localities, I'm sure that there are.
Yeah.
I don't know off the top of the head which ones they are. But yeah, so
is that partly just because
yes.
the feds now have so much control over everything? It's hard for states to do things.
There is, but again, so states do manage an enormous amount. I'd say the main issue actually is just that the federal government provides so much of the money for state governments that a lot of the competitive pressure that you think would be operating has really been neutered by the fact that states are just receive a bag of money from the federal government for certain purposes, and if they aren't allowed to go and use it for other purposes. And so they have very little incentive to try to figure out a way of saving taxpayers' money on it. And often the money, of course, comes with a lot of strings attached. If you don't want the strings, then you have to give back all the money. So very few places want to do that.
Yeah. So what would you do in a case when, when we hear about federal money being used and everyone says, okay, it's good. So like, for example, Hurricane Sandy hits New Jersey. The Jersey Shore is destroyed, and then Obama, it was probably hundreds of millions of dollars, I don't know off the top of my head, or Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. This would be the same thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, so private insurance, there's no reason that you couldn't have private disaster insurance, and of course there is a lot of private disaster insurance sold. Normally the feds get in where there's an area that's so high risk that the insurance would be really expensive, and people with beach homes don't feel like having to pay for it, and so either the feds take care of it or they subsidize it. And again, especially to me, the idea that someone with a beach house should get some subsidized insurance because it's a high disaster area, or I like the disaster. I'm always baffled by that idea. Look, they're living in a beach house.
Yeah.
Why can't a person in a beach house be expected to buy their own insurance?
Well, a lot of them do have insurance, but then I guess this is
to pay full market price for the insurance.
So ultimately, in a case like that, would people then be forced to move from a place like New Orleans?
So either here's the thing: you wouldn't really be forced to move until the value of your home falls to nothing.
Yeah, not forced to move, but eventually they would self-select out.
Yeah. So really, what would happen, given that beach homes normally are very valuable, is that those homes would just be worthless.
Yeah.
Because people realize if I move into this home, I'm going to have to buy some really expensive insurance. So that doesn't sound very good. So ultimately, subsidizing disaster insurance is a subsidy to people who develop in high disaster-prone areas.
Right.
Especially people who own land in those areas are ultimately the people who really benefit from it because it raises the value of that real estate.
I guess I never really thought about it in those specific terms, but I drive by Malibu here, which is gorgeous, and all these rich people living on these cliffs right on the water. Yeah. And at the end of the day, if something horrible happened, which of course would be horrific, the government would be then giving money to people who chose to live there in a high-risk thing because their insurance didn't go above and beyond whatever the necessary government requirements are.
Yeah. So my family lives in this area, so we're just a couple miles from the Northridge earthquake, and back in 1994. And I know relatives who were just calling up FEMA and saying, give me money. And they got money. It didn't matter how rich you are or what you had done or whether you had built your home safely. It's just the squeaky wheel got the grease. Really, all you had to do is pick up a phone
So is that the real problem with all of this? That ultimately, by doing all of this regulation, that you punish people who do the right thing.
Sure.
In a case like this, so someone who built their house earthquake safe, blah blah, invested their own money in all of that. Maybe had some damage, maybe didn't. Northridge was a massive earthquake. But then they're not getting government money because they did the right thing and put their own money in it.
Absolutely. So it's not fair. It's not just. I mean, economists would also point out it's highly inefficient because you're giving people incentives to not do the right things. The final point that's worth making is I'm the kind of person who defends radical and extreme views, but I never want to alienate people who are a little bit less radical, a little bit less extreme. In all these cases, I would still say, look, if you're very concerned about small minority of very poor people who really couldn't afford insurance during this time, then all right, fine. Have a government program that subsidizes or provides insurance for orphan children, for kids who have terrible diseases, for people who are very poor but happen to be struck by disaster. You could have a program that costs 5% as much as what we're currently doing. We could get rid of 95% without really bumping into any of the complaints that normal people have of saying what about the poor, what about kids, what about people with their responsible parents, and still you could go 95% of the way to the libertarian policy. And again, so I'm the kind of person who says, what about the last 5%? But I don't want to go and lose people because who are willing to go the first 95. So it's worth saying, look, with health insurance, all right, well, maybe we'll see, government could still subsidize it for kids of poor parents, for people that were born with a terrible congenital disease. So I could just make a few exceptions and then stop making the exceptions.
Yeah.
So like this small area, this is where it's so terrible, government's going to pay for it out of taxpayer money. Everyone else, though, sink or swim, you say, like, you're an adult, you should take care of yourself.
Yeah, you must bang your head on the wall every time people in public demand that the government throw more money at things, right? Because this is like, it's always the easy answer, and it feels right to people. Throw more money at education, throw more money.
And especially the throwing is a great image because it suggests a lack of accuracy, a lack of interest in actually targeting any specific problem. So, I mean, I've just wrapped up a book on education called The Case Against Education, where I argue for defunding education. Right? So, yes, isn't that bad for you? Well, yeah, it would be bad for me if people listen, but still my conscience says this is the right thing to do.
Okay, so sell me on that. I went to a public elementary school, public junior high, public high school.
Yep.
I went to State University of New York at Binghamton, which was hugely subsidized by the government. I think it was around $9,000 a year, and I got a great education. Why am I wrong on that?
I went to public schools right in this neighborhood, actually. But the heart of my case is something called the signaling model of education. So this is a fancy term for a common sense idea. It just says that a lot of the reason why education pays is not that it's teaching useful job skills, but rather you're jumping through hoops to show off for employers. All right, so just think about all the classes that you ever had to take, and then how few of them are actually relevant to the job that you do. You actually probably have a job where you do use more of what you studied. Although,
I was a political science major,
yes.
So there you go.
But think about all the classes that were required where you would not have been allowed to graduate without going through all of them. So I always have this example. Imagine you're like one Aristotle class short of college graduation, and yet you want to finish that class. Why? Because you're going to use the Nicomachean ethics and on the job? Probably not. Rather because you want that diploma, and employers are like many employers will just throw your application right in the trash unless you have that diploma.
But do you lose something doing it your way because of just a certain breadth of knowledge? Now, I'm not saying that every class should be mandated, and of course they stick you in things that shouldn't be necessary. But just that in terms of college specifically, that's where you should get a broad sense of knowledge. Would that be at risk then?
Well, here's the thing. It's not at risk because almost no one gets it now. That is the harsh truth, is that if you just go and look at what graduates of the current system know, it is next to nothing. Right? So there have been some great nationally representative surveys of what American adults know about government, about history, about economics, and the answer is they know next to nothing. So if we were to defend the system saying that people need breadth of knowledge, well, it's not a defense of the current system because the current system has not given it to them. The way that I like to think about it is that typical American college graduate is lucky to maybe answer half of the most basic questions you can imagine on civics.
Yeah.
Now you might say, well, that was still worthwhile. I say, it's not worthwhile because what do you call someone who knows half their letters? What do you call someone who knows half their letters?
An idiot?
Illiterate. If you know half your letters, you are illiterate. You're not half literate if you know half your letters.
Yeah.
You are illiterate because you cannot read.
Yeah.
So I say, if you know half the basic facts about U.S. history or about American government, you don't know half of what you need to know. You just don't know it at all.
If you think there are
you don't have a clue.
If you think there are 1.5 branches of government, we're in a lot of trouble.
You just don't have a clue about what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's what the current system has given us. So when people say, wouldn't this be a disaster? I say, well, you might say the current system is a disaster, but what I'm proposing wouldn't be worse. Now, there's always the question, well, but why not go and redouble our efforts so that people really do learn the stuff? Main thing I'd say is the resources that it would take are so vast. In fact, I don't know of any actual sign that it could be done. But I do have a way cheaper alternative to the current system for actually getting people to learn this stuff. So this is one of my most reformist proposals. So it does involve government money, but it's still, I'd say, a way better use of the government money than what we're doing right now.
Okay.
So here's the proposal. Every year there is a government test of your knowledge of civics, and if you get a good score, you get some money. The end. All right, now what's the point of this? Well, 2 points. First of all, it gives people an incentive to actually learn the material in whatever means actually works best.
Yeah.
So
you learn and you get something tangible too.
Yes. So you could learn it on the internet. You could just read a book. You could learn it in school. Like any possible method of learning the material is equally rewarded. So it doesn't go and throw money to high school civics teachers who have manifestly failed to actually generate a knowledgeable public. Instead, it just opens it up and just say there's a reward for knowing stuff. However you learn it is fine. But the other reason why you do it every year is because there's enormous evidence in educational psychology that people generally forget what they learn very quickly. So on test day, actually, I believe that most of the students in the civics class probably actually kind of knew their stuff. But what psychologists call fade out is so enormous. Just like in one year, out the next. If you don't keep testing it, you don't keep using it, you lose it. So if you have the test every year, this would actually lead to retention of knowledge over time, where people would not immediately forget the material as soon as they learn it. Because like, wow, I need to know it next year. And the year after that, every year I can get another $100 off of showing that I know my stuff. So
and you don't think there's a way to privatize that then too?
So you could do it with charity. I mean, like this is legal and no charity has done it. Right. So I'm not too optimistic about it happening. But yeah, like if some donor right now is interested in doing this would be great. But anyway, this would be so much cheaper than all the high school social sciences classes that we offer right now. Whenever you propose a test, people often start freaking out who's going to write the test. And I say, well, look, right now a key part of civics is knowing the answers the teacher wants to hear. So, like as long as you know that there's a certain bias on the official civics test, you just fake it. And like in order to do well in it, you still have to learn a bunch of stuff. So, I had so many college classes where I disagreed with the professor. I learned what the answers they wanted to hear, but I also learned the material at the same time. And like, there's no reason why you couldn't apply the same thing. I mean. So I don't see that it's really such a terrible deal.
Yeah, I'd love to see the fade out rate for kids the day after the SATs, because I remember studying for that thing, and I had a tutor with a little group of friends. But I remember thinking, man, when I'm done with this thing, I am going to let go of all this. Yeah. And if I had taken the test probably a week later, I probably got a half the score or something.
I mean, this is some of the most interesting research in psychology. So there's a lot of research on fade out in school, where you go and you teach the kids something, and then you go and measure it 1 or 2 years later in school. But the really scary fade out is from school to adulthood, because the kids in school, at least they kind of know I'm going to have to learn this again, I might get tested on again. But once you finally graduate, that's it. That's the end. Yeah. So there's a fantastic study of retention of higher mathematics throughout life, and like algebra and geometry. Like within a couple decades, most people took those classes are back to where they were before they even actually started the classes. The only people who remember their algebra and geometry are people who go all the way up to calculus. Yeah. So you go all the way to calculus, then you go and retain algebra and geometry for the rest of your life. But you have to go way beyond a subject to actually retain the basics. Mm-hmm. And this all fits with use it or lose it. Or Tiger Mom Amy Chu has a great slogan, like every day you don't practice is the day you get worse. So this does go with, well, so why bother teaching people things they're just going to forget anyway? Yeah. So this is part of my critique of what's wrong with throwing so much money at education. Now of course none of this denies that schools do teach some useful material. But again, my view is, all right, again, so like for the useful material, like most people can pay for it, most people's parents can pay for it. And then if there's going to be any role for government, let it be for the small minority of kids whose parents are not able to take care of them, or charity's not taking care of them. And then for just that last sliver of people, if there's going to be a role for government, let it be that. So don't throw money at a problem. There's going to be money, let it be narrowly targeted to give, to be mindful that you are taking money from taxpayers without their consent. And at minimum, you owe them a responsibility to spend the money well. I think that seems like a really basic thing.
I think we've given up that minimum a long time ago.
Yeah, but so it's one thing to say, look, this is so important that you have to pay whether you like it or not. Too bad. But then go and spend that money heedlessly. That seems like a true, that seems like a true human rights abuse, to take someone for money at gunpoint and then just blow it. Without saying, well, maybe this will do something. Who knows? Maybe if that's your attitude, you shouldn't have taken my money. You should maybe you should have asked me, but you shouldn't have made me if that's all you've got.